Did you know the first cat got hit by a bus?
No, that's just perfect.
Have you ever thought that an animal was spying on you?
An animal, no. But I did go to a demonstration in 2018 in Washington where there seemed to be an inordinate number of dragonflies around the speakers. And then when I got up to the dais, the stage, I realized that they were drones, little teeny tiny drones. I thought that was just scandalous.
When was this?
This was 2018.
Dragonfly drones. They're that small.
Yeah. They're big enough only to hold a microphone. That's it. But, I mean, it's a public speaking event. You can just listen. You don't need to fly a dragonfly drone up to the podium. There's no secret taking place. And I wondered if it was like a training exercise.
That's really fascinating. Have you ever inserted a microphone inside of an animal? Or used
No, not
anything
inside
like that?
of an animal. I was very conventional in that respect. I only broke into houses to plant bugs 3 or 4 times over the course of my career. And it was always very conventional, you know, in an ashtray, under a flower pot, something like that. Not in an animal.
That's fascinating. For people who are unfamiliar with your story, so you spent 14 years at the CIA, that's right. You helped capture some of the most dangerous terrorists alive. Then a single interview on TV in 2007 ended your career, your marriage, and sent you to federal prison. What exactly did you say that made you go to prison?
I said, what did I say that made me go to prison? Well, it depends on your point of view. What I said that started the whole slow motion chain of dominoes falling was that the CIA was torturing its prisoners, that torture was official U.S. government policy, and that the policy had been personally approved by the president himself. What they ended up getting me on was something much more innocuous. So they charged me with 5 felonies, including 3 counts of espionage. The espionage charges all came from that interview and a subsequent interview that I did with the New York Times. But what they got me on was in the summer of 2008, a journalist wrote to me and said, I'm writing a book on the Abu Omar rendition. Abu Omar was a cleric in Milan, Italy, that the CIA kidnapped and sent to Egypt to undergo torture. Can you introduce me to any of these 12 people so I can interview them for my book? I said, I don't know any of these people. And then he wrote me back and said, what about these people? And I said, I don't know these people. Kidnapping was not my thing at the agency. I didn't work with the kidnappers. And I said, you clearly know this issue better than I do. All I know is what I've read in the Washington Post. And then he said, what about the guy that you mention on page 100 and whatever of your book? I think his name is John. And I said, oh, you're talking about John Doe. I don't know whatever happened to him. He's probably retired and living in Virginia somewhere. And that's where they got me. I confirmed the last name of that former colleague, and that's what they hung me on.
Right. And how long were you sent to prison?
23 months. I was sentenced to 30 months. I did 23 months.
And how many people actually involved in the torture program, like the creation of it, enacting out specific torture, covering up the program, were sent to prison?
Exactly 0. I was the only person in any way associated with the torture program who went to prison, and I was the one who blew the whistle on it.
Can you give me an example of someone who is directly known to have done something? Is there any example of that? Like something that's been declassified that someone did, but they weren't held responsible?
At the highest levels, yes. The people who conceived of the torture, who approved of the torture, who planned the torture. So James Mitchell and Bruce Jessen are probably the most infamous. They were 2 contract psychologists that were brought into the CIA to actually create the torture program. And then after we captured Abu Zubaydah in Pakistan and sent him to the first secret prison, they were the ones that went out to the secret prison and actually tortured him. And what they ended up getting was $108 million of the taxpayers' money for their program that they created. I know, it's like bizarro world.
I find that really fascinating. There's not a lot to say about it, but I think an interesting way to ask you about some of this stuff is, now that people know you were once an enemy of the CIA for exposing such a dark secret, and are a person who values truth, what does going to prison teach you about how the world actually works?
Oh, wow. That's a good question and a very difficult one to answer. I learned so much in prison. I learned that really our entire system is broken. You know what? I'm going to throw a statistic at you just to try to put it into context. The United States has 5% of the world's population. Okay? We have 25% of the world's prison population. Worse than China, Russia, Iran. We lock up everybody. Congress creates 500 new felonies every decade. 50 new felonies every year that are, these are new laws that are passed, where something that was legal a year ago is suddenly illegal. And I'll give you an example. I've written about this a couple of times. There was a woman working for NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration in Hawaii. She was a GS-12 mid-level nobody. Honolulu's very expensive to live in. So to make some extra money, she and a business partner bought a boat. And they would take tourists out on the weekends to go whale watching. So they're out there whale watching one day, and they come up on a pod of orcas, and the orcas are feeding on a seal carcass. So everybody runs over to the side of the boat. They're taking pictures and video. Somebody whistles at the whale to, I don't know, keep it near the surface. I don't know. Nobody knows. A couple of weeks later, FBI. She answers the door. Do you have this boat? Yes. You take the boat out with tourists? Yes. Did you see some orcas a couple of weeks ago? Yes. Did you whistle at the whale? She said, no. Somebody did. But you know what? I videotape everything and I sell the DVDs to the tourists. So she gives the FBI the DVD. A couple of weeks later, they raid her apartment. They take every DVD. They take her computer. They take her phone. They seize the boat. And after an investigation, they charge her with one felony count of interfering with the feeding of a wild animal, which is a violation of the Endangered Species Act. She fought this thing for years. They ended up knocking it down to a misdemeanor. She took a plea to make it go away, but she lost her job. She lost her pension. She lost her boat. She lost her friendship with her business partner. She lost literally everything. Is society better off because she was prosecuted? Are we safer as a people because she was prosecuted? This kind of thing happens all the time. You know, there's this joke that everybody in prison is innocent. Well, you know what? I found that a lot of people actually are innocent. The thing is, and I'll recount an important conversation that I had with my attorneys. I was given a best and final offer from the Justice Department. 30 months, I do 23. And I had until noon of the next day to decide. My wife and I stayed up all night long discussing this, all night long. And at 6 a.m., I emailed the attorneys. I had 11 attorneys. Attorneys that the Washington Post called legal titans, the best attorneys money could buy. And I said, we've been up all night. We've been talking about this. We decided to turn it down. I'm going to trial. I didn't do anything wrong. I'm going to go to trial. As soon as I get in front of a jury, they're going to see how ridiculous this is. The attorneys come straight to the house. They get there 7 o'clock in the morning. The oldest, Plato Caceres, a legendary figure in law in Washington, gets right in my face and he says, "You stupid son of a bitch, take the deal." And I said, "You're the one who told me not to take the deal." He says, "I only said that to keep your spirits up." The second one, total Southern gentleman. He said, "If you were my own brother, I would beg you to take this deal." I had 5 kids at home. I didn't want to go to prison. The third one, the one that I liked and respected the most, pulls me aside and kind of angrily says to me, "You know what your problem is? Your problem is you think this is about justice, and it's not about justice. It's about mitigating damage. Take the deal." So I asked, if I don't take the deal and I'm convicted, what am I realistically looking at? And they said 12 to 18 years. Take the deal. What am I going to do? Like I say, I have 5 kids at home. So I took the deal. One of them said to me, before I made the final decision, this can be a blip in your life, or it can be the defining event in your life. Make it the blip. So I did. I took it.
When you think about the reason so many people are incarcerated, would you say it's mostly incarceration as an excuse for something that wasn't a crime? Or would you say it's that the people who do the incarcerations have incentive structures to do as many as possible?
We have a robust private prison system in the United States. The biggest company is Geo Solutions. And they build and manage prisons all across America. They're doing all of the immigration prisons right now. And so they have an incentive to make sure that every single bed is occupied. If there aren't people in those beds serving long sentences, they don't get paid. And once those people are in beds, they maximize their profits by cutting medication and food. On my very first full day in prison, I got to prison on a Thursday at 11. Friday was my first full day. And one of the guys across the hall from me said, "Friday, fish day." And I said, "Oh, okay, I like fish." And one of the Italians stopped me and he said, "You're not going to want to eat this fish. We call it sewer trout." And I said, "Oh, okay." So I go down to the chow hall, and behind the chow line where they're just slopping food onto your tray, there are these boxes stacked up, and they're clearly marked and out in public. And it says Alaskan cod, product of China, so it's not Alaskan cod. And underneath it says, feed use only, not for human consumption. And they're just slopping it onto every tray. And that became the norm. You only have a handful of choices of what to drink: water, coffee, or Kool-Aid. And the coffee's just brown water. So most everybody drinks Kool-Aid. Well, one day everybody's drinking Kool-Aid, 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 and there's a dead rat in the Kool-Aid. And God knows how long it was in there. One time, we got an all-hands email from the warden. There was this internal prison email system, Core Links. And the warden says, "So sorry, but a few weeks ago on Wednesday taco night, we accidentally fed you dog food. It's not our fault. It was mismarked at the meat plant. So the dog food was marked ground beef, and the ground beef was marked dog food. The company has been fined, whatever it was, $15,000, $19,000, whatever it was. So sorry." Well, I wrote about it at the time. And I said, the shame wasn't even that we were fed dog food. The shame was that we didn't even realize it was dog food because it tasted exactly like the ground beef that they fed us every day.
If you had to give me one sentence or phrase to describe how people in power make sure they stay in power, what would be that one phrase?
You know what? I would call it official corruption. Corruption that may not be illegal, but is still corrupt, where this is the system that we've given ourselves. It was finalized with the Supreme Court's decision in Citizens United, the Citizens United case, which found that corporations are people, right? So corporations can give literally unlimited amounts of money to political campaigns, right? Individuals can give up to, I think it's 4,000 in the primary, 4,000 in the general. But corporations can give unlimited amounts of money. People can give unlimited amounts of money to political action committees. So all you do is you just fill out the paperwork and you set up a PAC. It only takes but 15 minutes. And so look at this race, this Thomas Massey race the other day. This is for a position that pays $180,000 a year. And the two sides spent $35 million for one seat that pays $180,000. That's corrupt, as far as I'm concerned. And it was almost entirely outside money.
What do you think they were buying?
Oh, they were buying, I'm going to take a lot of heat for this, they were buying a seat for AIPAC. That's really what it comes down to. AIPAC spent millions and millions of dollars just on that one seat because Thomas Massey does not support Israel's political agenda. Yeah. We see this actually all over the country. If you are not 100% pro-Israel, they'll primary you and they'll try to replace you with somebody that is 100% pro-Israel. It's something like 90%, 88% of members of Congress have taken money from AIPAC because it's better just take the money, just vote pro-Israel so you don't have to worry about re-election.
I want to ask you something that you've said that really struck me was the selection process for people in intelligence. And I know we'll talk about that, but why do you think you were selected for the CIA?
A CIA psychiatrist once told me that the CIA actively seeks to hire people who have sociopathic tendencies, not sociopaths, because sociopaths have no conscience. And while they can blow right through a polygraph exam, they are impossible to control. People who have sociopathic tendencies do have a conscience. They do react in a polygraph, but they're willing to work in legal, moral, and ethical gray areas. And as an example, when I was going through the interview process, there were two other men and a woman in my little group. And the instructor said, let's say you're a CIA officer undercover overseas. You get a cable from headquarters saying, we really, really need the latest Indonesian economic figures. You call the Indonesian economic officer, you invite him to lunch, you have a great time, you invite him to lunch again, you have an even better time, you take him to dinner, you get together with your wives over dinner, the kids begin playing together, the wives become friends, but 6 months into this, you realize this guy's not recruitable. He doesn't have any vulnerabilities that you can latch onto. So what do? Because headquarters really needs those numbers. So one guy raises his hand and he says, you double down and you work on him another 6 months and maybe something will come up. And the woman raises her hand and she says, maybe you work it through the wives. Maybe your wife can convince his wife to convince him to give you the numbers. And I'm like, what? I raised my hand. I said, you break into the Indonesian embassy and you steal it. And he says, that's exactly what you do. You break into the Indonesian embassy and you steal it. A normal person, rather, isn't going to break into a foreign embassy and steal classified documents. I would, but that's what a sociopathic tendency is. So I think that was one thing that they saw. The other thing that they saw that was very specific was that I was a good writer. And when I was in graduate school, my grad school advisor was a CIA officer undercover as a grad school advisor. He really liked my writing style. And so he kind of plucked me out of the crowd and put me in the system. And the next thing I knew, I was at the CIA.
How do you think you write? That is so interesting.
Well, it's different now, wildly different now. But at the time, My writing style was very punchy and concise and directly to the point. And that's really what they want at the CIA. My boss told me one time when I first got hired, he says, listen, the president doesn't give a shit about your opinion on an issue. He wants to know the facts, and then he wants to know exactly what the facts mean, and then he'll make his own opinion. So I cut to the chase. Now my writing style is completely different.
That's a fascinating one. I've been shocked listening to some of your interviews at how solid your memory is of being able to recount certain events in specific details.
I have a very sharp memory.
But I want to ask you on the sociopathic tendencies portion. I've heard some people discuss this idea that maybe some colleges, universities, intelligence agencies select people not based on sociopathic tendencies, but maybe some form of like dissociative personality disorder. Have you heard of this?
No, that would scare me.
Yeah.
Well, it's possible that there could be something to that. The CIA is part of the MK Ultra program in the 60s, up until about 1975. They did MK Ultra related experiments at universities all around the country. There were a lot of universities in California where they did these kind of experiments. And there are rumors that, for example, Charles Manson may have been part of these experiments. Sirhan may have been a part of these experiments. We don't know, because when Senator Church told the CIA director, do not destroy the documents, he went back to headquarters and ordered all the documents to be destroyed. They destroyed about 85% of them. So we only know a little bit of what MK Ultra actually did.
On that one specifically, did you ever meet someone you suspected had been MK Ultra'd?
No, but I have met a lot of people who believe they had been MK Ultra'd. Yeah. This is one thing that the CIA actually counts on. There are a lot of crazy people out there. When I first got out of prison, virtually the first bit of work that I did was I got hired by the American Psychological Association, the APA, to go to Brookline, Massachusetts, and it was like an offsite. It was me and 12 psychologists, and we were supposed to come up with a new set of protocols by which APA member psychologists could conduct custodial interrogations. We went to lunch one day, and I said, guys, I was the only one who was not a psychologist. I said, guys, I have a question for you, a serious question. I said, not a single day goes by that I don't get emails from people who say that the CIA planted a chip in their brain, or the CIA is communicating with them through a filling in their tooth, or the CIA is beaming waves at their head. I get that a lot. And a couple of them started to laugh. And I said, why is that so funny? And one of them said, this is the most common entry-level mental illness that we diagnose. Oftentimes, when people feel overwhelmed in life, their brains need to blame somebody or blame something, and they default to the thing, the entity that is the easiest to blame. That's a secret organization, one that they don't understand. And we all know what the CIA is. We've all heard stories about what the CIA does. So a lot of people just default to the idea that the CIA is somehow interfering in their lives. It's very common. They're not dangerous. They're just going through something right now. That's why you get so many emails. But then I got an email from a woman. She was the wife of a foreign ambassador in the United States. And she said she wanted to hire me because she believed she was under electronic surveillance. Well, I wrote this book called The CIA Insider's Guide to Surveillance and Surveillance Detection. I was a surveillance instructor at the CIA. I said, okay, great. This is what I'll charge you. Let's meet, and we'll figure out if you're under surveillance. I had a bunch of equipment that I had bought online to detect, different waves and different transmissions and stuff like that. So I met with her at the Tyson's Galleria Mall in suburban Virginia. And totally normal, like 65-year-old woman. And she was adamant that she was under surveillance. And I said, okay, I wasn't under surveillance coming here, and I don't notice anybody around us that wasn't here when we arrived, and we just picked the place by random. So why don't you start walking home? I'm going to follow you from a discreet distance, and I'll be able to do counter surveillance and see if you're being followed. So I let her get pretty far ahead of me, and she wasn't being followed. So I go up to her apartment, and knock on the door, I open the door, and literally the entire apartment, floor, walls, ceiling, is covered in aluminum foil. And I go, what is this? I knew exactly what it was. And she's like, it's to reflect the waves. And I was like, fuck, she's insane. And then she would call me in the middle of the night and say, they're beaming the waves at me. My brain feels like it's going to explode. I'm like, those aren't waves. Those are your neighbors put Christmas lights on their balcony. It's just Christmas lights. They're spying on me. They don't care about you. They're not spying on you. In good conscience, I couldn't take her money. And I told her, I said, listen, I can refer you to a couple people who are experts at this sort of thing. She was furious, wanted no part of it, and ended up leaving the country. But then I had a former CIA colleague tell me, somebody's beaming waves at me. And I'm like, dude, not you too. And he said, I'm serious, man. He said, I went for an MRI and it shows a traumatic brain injury. And all of a sudden I'm nauseous and I'm dizzy. Next thing you know, it's called Havana syndrome. And I was like, I've known this guy for 35 years. And if he says he's got Havana syndrome, he's got Havana syndrome. It's a real thing. I had a colleague at the time, we were doing a radio show together, and he's making fun of it, and it's caused by crickets, or we're doing it to ourselves, or whatever. And I'm like, I know these people. These are serious people. And they're showing traumatic brain injuries in MRIs. There's something to it. Whether it's the Russians or the Chinese or us, I have no idea. But that is real.
So her concerns would be valid if she was a different person, perhaps.
Yeah, and you know what? One of the CIA psychologists said something to me that has really stuck with me. He said, always ask them if the waves follow them when they travel. Because the equipment that the Pentagon has developed, which has to be nearly identical to what the Chinese, the Israelis, the Russians, and others use, it's not portable. And so if they say, no, when I go to my sister's house, I feel better, that might be something. If they say, everywhere I go, they follow me, and they're beaming the waves, no, that's a mental illness.
Mm-hmm. Have you ever given someone DMT as a CIA spy?
No. One of my colleagues did, got arrested for it. Spent 6.5 years in prison for it.
Why would someone do that?
He was a sick SOB. And it's funny, I was like the last one to see that he was truly sick. It was the women in the office who used to say, there's something wrong with that guy. And I was like, he's getting promoted pretty quickly. They're like, no, something's up. Next thing you know, he's under arrest. It's on the front page of the Post, and that's exactly what he was doing.
Have you ever heard any stories of friends or maybe people in other countries giving people ketamine to spy on them?
No, never from inside the CIA. Outside the CIA, people talk about ketamine a lot. The CIA experimented with drugs from roughly 1952 until 1975. I get a lot of people who say, MK Ultra never ended, they just changed the name. Okay, if you have evidence of that, lay it out, let's blow the whistle on it, and we'll get the FBI involved and get people arrested. Otherwise, shut the fuck up. Because there's not enough time in the day to chase these silly rumors.
Right.
Ketamine is something that keeps popping up. I will say that the CIA spent a lot of time and a lot of money experimenting with LSD. But that seems to have gone away around 1975. When I was there, I started in January of 1990. I never, ever heard anything about any drugs. There was some talk about truth serum, but that was used during the Vietnam War against prisoners. And during the course of my career, I never encountered it.
Before we get into some of the other past projects, I want to ask something about you. Can you tell me 2 truths and 1 lie?
2 truths and 1 lie. About my career?
Just anything.
About anything? Yeah. At one time, I was a licensed pilot. I was the fencing champion of Bahrain. And let me think of something else I can say. I got into a terrible, terrible fight with Alec Baldwin, and the last thing we said to each other was, "Fuck you."
Kayla, do you have a guess?
I'm gonna guess the first one.
She said the licensed pilot's a lie.
Do you want me to say?
What was it? Yeah.
I was not the fencing champion of Bahrain. I took fencing lessons in Bahrain.
Damn, that
but
sounded
wasn't
the most
champion.
realistic because the pronunciation. Okay, that's
But
interesting.
fucking Alec Baldwin and I hate each other.
Wait, so you actually got in a fight with?
Oh yeah, he's a total asshole.
Tell me about that.
When I got out of prison, a buddy of mine, who's an Academy Award-winning writer, said that he wanted to do an off-Broadway play based on my case. And he said, Alec Baldwin and I have been looking for something to do together for years. And he said, let's get together for lunch, the 3 of us, in New York. I said, great. I take the train up to New York, go to this little place on the west side, and my friend says, tell him the story about this. Tell him the story about that. Tell him this story from Kuwait, from your book. So I'm telling him stories. He's just sitting there looking at me, listening to the stories. And finally I said, listen, if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. And he goes, I think you're full of shit. I said, excuse me? He said, I think you made all this shit up. I think you're full of shit. I said, I'm a lot of things, but I'm not a liar. And I said, if you think I'm a liar, then fuck you. And he goes, fuck you. I said, fuck you. And I got up and I walked out. And my friend's like, no, wait, guys, no, wait, stop. I was so mad, I walked all the way back to the train station. So then, I don't know, 6, 8, 10 months passed, whatever it is. And my friend and I had come up with this idea for a show. And we had a bunch of pitch meetings set up. So I flew out to LA and we pitched it to Fox. And they said, nah, it's kind of interesting, but it's not really for us. And maybe if you had somebody important attached to it, it might be a little bit more palatable. So we go back to Soho House. He was a member of Soho House. And he said to me, you know what we need? We need to attach an A-list star. And I said, don't even say it. And he said, he's an A-list star. I said, all right. So we go into this little breakout room. And he calls him, he puts him on speaker. And he said, Alec, I'm here with Kiriakou. And he goes, what's that asshole one? And I said, yeah, nice to talk to you again too, Alec. And he says, well, John's got an idea. So I gave him my idea. And he goes, actually, that's a good idea. You can attach me. So we attach him. The next meeting was at AMC. And he came into the meeting on Zoom. And they were like, wow, that's a cool idea. We'll take it. I said, great. They said, have your attorneys call business affairs and we'll get this thing squared away. Great. Well, like weeks pass and I haven't heard anything from business affairs. So I called my attorney and I said, hey, have you heard anything from AMC Business Affairs? He said, geez, I forgot all about that. Let me call over there. He calls over and they said, we walked away from that project. And he's like, why? Oh, Alec Baldwin dropped out and he went to do some project at HBO. He played the CIA director or something like that. So I called him And I was like, you know what? I said, fuck you, Baldwin. I said, you didn't even have the couth to call and say, I'm going to drop out. Just like that, he goes, fuck you. And he hangs up on me, and we never spoke again.
I don't mean to be insensitive, but how's he doing?
I understand that he's doing better. I'll tell you, when he got arrested, our friend called me, and he said, you know, it would probably mean a lot to Alec if you called him and just kind of walk him through this. And I said, fuck him. I don't care. I said, he killed that woman. Somebody's got to pay for this. Even if it was an accident, the buck has to stop somewhere. I said, no, I'm not calling him.
That's fascinating, man. Yeah, I mean, for the record, I don't consider you to be a liar, but that's just because it's solely just an energy thing, you know? It's like you can see people talk online all day, but when you meet them in person, it's a totally different experience.
I completely agree.
Until 1995, the CIA paid people to spy using their minds with Project Stargate.
Correct.
One operator claimed to have done over 400 psychic missions. Did you ever sit in a Stargate briefing?
Never sat in a Stargate briefing, but did participate in a long session where the subject was under hypnosis. Stargate was weird to me, and that was managed through the Office of Medical Services. I only worked with OMS, and it wasn't even the physicians so much as it was the psychologists, when we needed to use the psychologists operationally to help us get the most that we could out of a source. The Stargate stuff was just so out there. To tell you the truth, I remember saying to a guy, I don't have time for this. I need to hear it from the source's mouth. I can't sit in a room where some guy's going into a trance, you know, looking off into space, and then tells me something that he probably just made up. So I never worked with it. Hypnosis was different. I've never seen anything like it before. It was the real deal.
Have you been hypnotized?
I've never been hypnotized. Yeah, I'd like
I've
to
been
try it.
hypnotized a few times. Yeah.
Yeah. Did you know that you were under hypnosis when you were under?
That's a really good question. A couple times, yeah, I'd say so. Not every time. Yeah, some people have a really masterful skill when it comes to hypnosis, I would say. Would you say that's the case?
I never saw anything like it before in my life. I flew out to Europe with a psychologist from the CIA and a guy who was a psychiatrist and a hypnotist. And he was president of the American Society of Hypnotists or some such thing. We had a walk-in in a different country. And a walk-in is somebody who literally walks into an American embassy and says, I have information, I want to see a CIA officer. 95 times out of 100. And I mean that literally, there have been studies done. They're crazy people. Just walking off the street. And they want to yell because the chip in their tooth is telling them to, kill the prime minister or whatever. And you say, okay, I'm so sorry to hear that. And you write it up and say it's a crazy person. Send it in just so it's on the system, in the system. So we had this guy come in and he says, I think I witnessed the aftermath of an assassination. And the assassination was like a major front page, global assassination. So we're like, okay. We turn him over to the FBI. The FBI says, he's a nut. We're not interested. But then he said something to me that I thought, how could he possibly know that? And what he said was that he was driving down the highway and decided he had to take a leak. So he pulls off some exit, and the only thing at this exit is a church. And it's just a little teeny tiny chapel. He goes behind the chapel, and there's a big banyan tree, with a giant trunk, right? So he's behind the banyan tree, taking a leak. And this van pulls up, and 2 motorcycles pull up. The van pulls a ramp down, and they drive the motorcycles into the back of the van, and the 2 guys on the motorcycles get out. The guy who was driving the van says, "Is he still alive?" And one of the motorcyclists says, "He has to be dead by now. It'll be on the news." Well, that was the day of, like an hour after this major assassination. That was it. He didn't say, I heard them say, "I did it, and my name is," something nutty like that. So we flew him to this other country. We flew out there and met him. And I asked him, "What do you want from us?" Because clearly he's not doing this out of the goodness of his heart, right? And he says, "My wife has breast cancer. I can't afford treatment. She's going to die. I want her to have cancer treatment in the United States." I said, "Done." So another case officer and I flew out with a psychologist and the psychiatrist. And the guy didn't speak any English. So we translated, and we turned all the lights off in the room. He's sitting in a chair like this. The psychiatrist is sitting right behind him. And we're translating. We told him, "Put your hand up in the air." And he goes like this. And we're going to count backwards to 10, from 10. And when we get to 0, you're going to be out. And he's like, "Okay." As soon as we get to 0, his hand goes like this. But his arm stayed up in the air for 4.5 hours. I never saw anything like it. So I'm asking him, "Can you see the license plate on the van?" And he's like this. He goes, "Yes." And I said, "Can you see the license plate on the van?" And he's like this. He goes, "Yes." And I said, "Can you tell me what the letters are?" And he goes, and like reads off the letters, like he's squinting to look at the plate. I give the numbers to my colleague. He runs into the adjoining room, calls headquarters. They call the station calls liaison calls back. They say it's a stolen plate. I couldn't believe it. It was a stolen plate. So after 4.5 hours, we count back from 10 again. His hand is like this, and we get to 0, and his hand drops down, and he opens his eyes, and he says, "What happened?" And then he goes, "Blah," and just vomits all over himself, and then runs to the bathroom. And the psychiatrist said, "I've read about this in the literature, but I've never actually seen it happen." And I said, "Do you believe what he said?" And he said, "I believe that he believes what he said." So it didn't bring us any close to the killers, but in the end, we all came to the conclusion that he was telling the truth. The whole case fell apart later, where he got back in touch with us. He triggered this emergency meeting. I met him at this crazy place outside of town, and he said he had been kidnapped, but he happened to have a little recorder in his pocket, and he recorded the kidnapping. And I'm like, "Oh my God, that sounds kind of nuts, but okay, let me have it." So he gives me the recording, and it's him, and he goes, "Wait, what are you doing?" And then it's also him saying, "I am kidnapping you."
Only Sky consistently has the lowest prices on the latest phones, with unlimited data.
Lloyds, proud partners of the Lloyds Tour of Britain.
Yo, check this out. This is Ding Dong Ravers. Sneak to the bow.
Yo, people, it's back.
I'm Gypsy. You can find me in the carnival sound up anytime.
easiest moss farm in Minecraft, and this is all the items you'll need to build this tutorial. The area needed for this tutorial is a 15 by 12. This
I am the Minister of Interior, and I am involved with a terrorist group. And I'm like, are you kidding me? So afterwards, I was like, listen, you had me for a minute. I believed you. But this...
And this is the same guy from the initial case?
Yeah, I said, I'm offended by this. And he says, well, you guys weren't making any progress. And I said, you can't just call me and say that the Minister of Interior is the leader of the terrorist group that we're after.
Right.
With your voice on the tape.
Just to clarify on this, so you're saying that this guy witnessed a major assassination in person?
He witnessed the aftermath of the assassination.
So he witnessed that specific, okay.
He witnessed them hiding the getaway motorcycles. They shot the guy on motorcycles. Went up over the mountain to the highway, got away, and then put the motorcycles in the van, and then did whatever with them.
To kind of close the loop on the psychic question and ask about this in general, because my takeaway from what you just said is that some people can be under hypnosis and do things that they believe are true or right, say things.
That was the whole Manchurian Candidate theory.
Right.
And that was the whole basis of MK Ultra. It's funny, the way MK Ultra started, we had a source who said that the Russians were doing the same kind of thing, that they were experimenting with remote viewing and ESP and all this stuff. That actually wasn't true. What was true was that the Chinese were doing it. We didn't have any sources in China at the time. And so we were like, oh my God, we're behind the 8 ball. Mind you, the CIA's just 5 years old at the time. And China had only been communist for 3 years. So we haven't quite gotten our footing in China by 1952. And so we panicked. And we were like, oh my God, the Chinese are ahead of us. The Russians are ahead of us. We've got to catch up. Let's make this thing called, we'll call it MK Ultra. It's funny, the digraph, MK, just meant that it was a scientific operation. Like you can have QR, MB, AR, AL, whatever, and each one means something. It means a country, it means a domestic operation, it means, terrorism or proliferation or whatever. And then after the digraph, the word is just ginned up at random by a computer. So they just picked out of a hat Ultra, MK being this experimentation thing, and it became MK Ultra.
Do you think anyone is actually psychic? Personal?
My friends are going to laugh at me when I say, I think some people probably have some sort of abilities that others don't have. Yeah. I'm not saying that I would hang my hat on it or live my life based on it. I had this friend who went to a psychic once and she told him he was going to live to 88. And he started just jaywalking all over the place. Because he was like, no, I'm going to live till I'm 88. I'm not going to get hit. I said, you may live like as a quadriplegic until you're 88. He's like, I hadn't thought of that. But yeah, I think there are probably some people who are more sensitive to these kinds of things than others.
And Hyperoptic, we do full fiber broadband. So you can do that final boss battle. Or catch that final cliffhanger.
CIA people love to go watch CIA movies. Not because they love necessarily the CIA movies, but they love to criticize them. Hi, I'm John Kiriakou, former CIA officer. Today we're going to break down scenes from spy movies. This is The Breakdown. The Man from U.N.C.L.E.
We'll leave you to the Get acquainted. All right. Give my regards to you.
I laugh because that's true. We always overdo it. I worked for a station chief one time who had never been an operations officer. She had been a paper pusher, and they made her the chief of a big station. There was some nuclear scientist in town. She sent an all-hands email around the station saying, everybody's got to go try to recruit this nuclear scientist. Figured out what hotel he was staying in. And we went to the bar, because where are you going to go? You can't just like ask what room he's in and go up to his room and invite yourself in. So we're all sitting in the bar. First of all, this nuclear scientist was from a Muslim country, and so he's not going to be in the bar of all places. And as it turned out, every single seat at every single table in the bar was occupied by a CIA officer. And then when we decided this guy's not going to come in here for a drink, literally everybody in the bar got up at the same time and walked out. And the whole thing was a failure and an embarrassment.
What would motivate you to become the CIA's most effective agent? I concluded it must be to counteract the humiliation of knowing your balls are at the end of a very long leash held by a very short man.
Yeah, I know that this movie was a comedy and it was a lot of fun, but that's also an accurate portrayal of a hostile operational meeting. We've all been in meetings like that, where you're trying to intellectually one-up each other. Maybe you'd like to recruit him, he'd certainly like to recruit you. If you're going to make a threat, you have to be able to follow through on that threat. But these kinds of meetings, yes, literally happen every single day. The night manager.
If you're content, I suggest we process the second half of the payment.
I'm entirely content.
Good.
Please check.
Thank you.
Pause here. This to me looks like a clandestine transfer, goods for money. Could be anything. Could be anything from equipment to weapons to drugs. But this is normally how something like this would happen. Let's skip ahead.
Jesus.
This is gorgeous. My gosh, that's comfortable. No, check this out.
My name is John Kiriakou. I was a field agent for the CIA. I hunted, tracked, and captured terrorists around the world. This is everything I'm authorized to tell you. I'm not allowed to say how many officers or what percentage of CIA officers are dedicated to counterterrorism. After 9/11, the CIA became a paramilitary organization. We started borrowing special forces guys. They would be on loan to the CIA to just fly somewhere, kill somebody, and then fly back for the next Tuesday meeting. The most obvious risk of working as a counterterrorism officer, obviously, is the risk of death. There were two guys who I worked with in CTC, the Counterterrorism Center, Helga Bose and Mike Spann, who were killed in the line of duty. And it wasn't just them. I was the chief of the counterintelligence branch in the Osama bin Laden group. The woman that I sat next to was killed in the line of duty in the Khost bombing in Afghanistan. The suicide bomber, he blew her and 6 of our colleagues up. So death, destruction, but on an equally personal note, your marriage is probably not going to survive an operational tour in the Directorate of Intelligence. The stress is just otherworldly. It's the most difficult and dangerous thing you can do as a CIA officer for a variety of reasons. First, when people join terrorist groups, they do that because they are true believers. And in most cases, they hate you or what you stand for. more than they love life itself. And so they are very happy to die for a cause. At the same time, if you're working counterterrorism issues, you generally aren't doing it in London or Paris or Ottawa. You're doing it in Yemen, Somalia, Afghanistan, Pakistan. In Pakistan, unless you were going to carry out an operational act, you had to stay on the compound. It was just simply too dangerous. And so not only do you have this exceedingly difficult job to do, but you have to blend in and not attract attention to yourself and keep yourself safe at the same time. I'll give you an example. When I was stationed in Athens, Athens was one of the most dangerous places in the world for Americans, especially for American CIA officers. 17 November had murdered the CIA station chief, 2 U.S. defense attachés, and a hapless Air Force technical sergeant. This was a very, very lethal group. And so that was my primary job, to work against an incredibly deadly group. And I was the go-to guy on Arab terrorism there because I spoke Arabic. And I drove an armored car, level 4 armor. I carried 2 guns. I had a Glock 9mm on my waist and a Smith & Wesson 38 on my ankle. Even kept a buck knife in my back pocket just in case everything turned to and that's all I had left. Halfway through my tour, the British Embassy received a new defense attaché. His name was Stephen Saunders. He was a 1-star general, brigadier general. Everybody loved him. Everybody liked to be around him, the life of the party. He loved being on camera. So anytime you're at some event and there's a camera, Stephen would run up to the camera and give an interview, which is, great if you're not in a country that's categorized as a critical threat for terrorism. I took delivery of this new BMW 540, fully armored. And so we were at a cocktail party the day that I got the car. And I was standing there with Stephen. He was making fun of me, and he says, "You Americans, you're so obsessed with security. It's a NATO country. What are you so afraid of?" And they all chuckled. And I said, "You Brits live in a dream world. If you think because they have palm trees and pretty beaches that they're not going to kill you if they have the chance." And we all laughed again. And then a couple of weeks later, I made a mistake that I had never made before. I slept through my alarm.